Of all the ancient powers that haunt the forgotten world, none endures like a forest that carries memory in its roots. Vampires hide in crypts, witches whisper in rafters, spirits cling to ruins. But a living forest waits, patient as stone, watching centuries drift by like sook. Its justice is deliberate, its hunger quiet, its will older than any king who ever claimed dominion. Villagers speak of monsters as if danger comes from distant hills, wandering on foreign feet. Yet the oldest terror rises from the ground beneath them. A forest may cradle life or devour it, offer refuge or reclaim its due. And the Veilwood, dark cradle of forgotten vows, remembers every oath uttered in fear and every promise broken in greed. Across uncounted generations, its tale has passed from trembling hearth to trembling hearth. A valley that believed itself safe, a people who mistook silence for mercy, and a forest that never forgave what was taken from it. No beast, no spirit, no wandering shadow unleashed the judgment that followed. The Veilwood itself chose the hour, and the inheritance it would demand. The story begins in the valley's earliest days, when the three villages were young, and the Veilwood still welcomed those who honored its laws. Travelers spoke of herbs that healed, waters that glowed softly at dusk, and paths that shifted with the forest's mood. For a time, harmony endured between man and the living wilderness, a forest that once crowned itself guardian of the valley. But harmony never survives long under human hands. As the villages grew, so did their greed. Sacred groves were cut for timber, old trails fenced, and whispered laws ignored. Each village committed its own betrayal. None the same, each unforgivable. They scorned the forest's warnings, mocked its rights, and claimed its gifts as their own, scarring the forest with deception and violence. Yet the Veilwood did not strike at once. It watched. Roots deepened, shadows lengthened. The animals grew restless, then silent. Trees leaned in unnatural ways, as though listening for a confession never offered. Generation by generation, the balance frayed. What was once sanctuary soured into warning. What was once guardian grew into judge. And the forest's patience thinned into wrath. When the old herbalist died, something shifted beneath the soil. Roots tightened, as if bracing for an overdue verdict. Trails long lost began to surface, glowing faintly under the moon. Every candle in her cottage dimmed, guttering without wind. The Veilwood was stirring after decades of uneasy quiet, sending out a call felt rather than heard, a summons no living soul could mistake. In her absence, only one heir remained, the herbalist's grandchild, bearer of a legacy never asked for. Among her belongings they found a map, creased, stained, marked with forbidden paths and warnings older than memory. It was not inheritance, but accusation, a ledger of promises broken. And the map's awakening marked the beginning of a debt the Veilwood had waited generations to reclaim. Night settled strangely over the valley, heavier than any dusk the villagers remembered. The air grew still, the lantern flames trembling without wind, and even the river dimmed to a muted whisper. Every creature seemed to pause at once, as though the earth had forgotten how to breathe. The air sensed it before understanding it, silence woven with intention, not peace, Then the forest moved, not metaphorically, but with the slow, deliberate shift of an ancient body adjusting its weight. Branches leaned toward the valley in unison, their leaves rustling in patterns too rhythmic for chance. Roots groaned beneath the soil, and the tree line rippled as though drawing breath. The Veilwood was no longer resting. It was waking. Animals began to flee. Deer burst from the underbrush in panicked waves. Rabbits darted toward high ground, and even the wolves slunk with lowered tails, whining at something unseen. Strange new tracks appeared in the mud, twisted, elongated, directionless. Something was moving through the forest, but not in the manner of any natural thing born of the valley. Villagers hurried indoors, shuttering windows as dogs barked at empty paths. The eldest among them whispered old warnings they once dismissed as superstition. Children hid beneath blankets as a faint sound drifted from the Veilwood, a whisper soft as breath, unmistakably shaped like a name. It traveled through the windless dark, delicate yet commanding. Only one person felt the pull tighten around their heart. The Heir, marked by lineage and by the map that had begun to stir. The whisper was not calling the valley. It was calling them alone. And in that quiet summons lay a truth unspoken for generations. The forest had chosen its witness. The map rested on the table as if waiting, its ink shifting subtly under candlelight. Paths once faded, now pulsed with faint luminescence, symbols curling like living roots awakening from centuries of sleep. When the Heir traced a finger along one trail, the candles bent toward the parchment, their flames stretching as though lured by invisible breath. Dust spiraled gently upward, circling the map in a slow, deliberate halo. A cold draft rolled through the cottage, unsettling dried herbs that had hung untouched since the herbalist's passing. It did not feel like wind. It felt like a tension, ancient, focused, and unblinking. The forest was not merely calling, it was choosing. Outside, night deepened into a bruised blue. The tree line shifted with intent, branches angling forward like listeners drawn toward confession. Roots beneath the earth groaned again, steady and immense. Nothing in the valley moved freely now. Everything obeyed a rhythm older than memory. The Veilwood was gathering itself, preparing to receive the Heir. Step by step, the Heir approached the cottage door, uncertain whether the motion came from instinct or compulsion. The threshold between home and forest glowed faintly. A seam of moonlight stretched thin across trembling soil. When their boot touched the earth, a subtle pulse traveled up their leg. Recognition, not welcome. From between two ancient oaks, a trail appeared that had not been visible moments before. Moss glistened with pale green light, stones shimmering as though remembering sunlight long forgotten. The Heir felt the pull again. Sharp, insistent, undeniable. They stepped forward, not by choice but by summons, answering a call older than the language of the valley. The moment the Heir stepped beneath the Veilwood canopy, the world narrowed to breath and shadow. Sound vanished as though swallowed whole. No birds stirred, no insects hummed. Only the slow groan of ancient limbs shifting in unseen currents. The forest exhaled resin-scented air, thick with memory older than mortal bloodlines. The ground softened beneath each step, rising and settling like the chest of a sleeping creature. Moss glowed faintly in the dimness, illuminating the contours of fallen branches with sickly green halos. A pulse, steady, deliberate, throbbed beneath the soil. It was not enchantment. It was presence, vast and aware, pressing against the air's skin like distant thunder. Above, branches twisted into rib-like shapes, forming a corridor that guided the air deeper. Hollow knots stared like watching eyes, unblinking and patient. Leaves rustled in synchronized waves despite the dead air, creating patterns that resembled whispered warnings. Nothing here was random. The forest was arranging itself around its chosen visitor. The deeper the air walked, the more scars the Veilwood revealed. Ancient carvings marked certain trunks, symbols of rites long abandoned. Vine coils hung like nooses from bent boughs. A circle of stones lay blackened, as if scorched by unnatural fire. These were not relics of time, but testimonies, memories the forest refused to bury. A whisper slithered through the trees, brushing the air's spine. It carried no words, only intent, recognition, expectation, perhaps hunger. The air understood this was not a greeting. It was an acknowledgement. The Veilwood knew they had come, and it was waiting for what must follow. The forest guided the air toward marshland, where the ground sagged with each cautious step. Fog clung low over black water, rippling through nothing touched it. Trees bent away from the mire, their trunks twisted in avoidance, as though even they feared what dwelled within. Silence thickened, carrying purpose. Through the mist emerged a crooked hut half swallowed by the swamp. Its walls were woven from tangled roots and river reeds, shaped disturbingly like ribs. A dim yellow glow flickered inside, pulsing weakly like the heartbeat of something dying or waiting. No cottage had ever looked less like a home, and more like a lair. From the doorway uncurled a tall, thin figure draped in dripping moss. Her hair hung like riverweed, her skin cracked with dried mud, revealing faint sigils beneath. She leaned on a root-twisted staff, still slick with marsh water. She watched the air with eyes pale as bone, saying nothing. The air recoiled from her presence. Her voice finally rose like something dredged from deep water. "You carry her map," she rasped. "Blood binds you to the oath she kept, and to the debt she left." She circled the air without sinking into the mire, her movements sinuous and unsettling. The forest remembers who broke faith, and it remembers who must answer. She tapped her staff against the earth. The swamp rippled outward like an animal shuddering in fear. "He calls," she whispered, though no name followed. "He wakes beneath root and stone." Her gaze hardened. "And you, child of the map, have been summoned to witness what the valley buried." The forest had chosen its herald. The mud witch raised her staff, and the entire marsh stiffened as if suspended in her breath. Her eyes gleamed with a hunger that was not physical but ancient. "No one enters his shadow freely," she murmured, "not even the blood of the map-maker." She extended a mud-slicked hand. "The Veilwood demands its toll." The air instinctively recoiled, yet the forest's summons tightened like a snare around their spine. The witch's voice thickened. "Blood is cheap to trees. Flesh is cheaper still. The forest wants what you cannot reclaim." Her cracked lips curled. A memory. The swamp grew colder. Yours. Taken, consumed. No ritual was older or more feared. a finger of river mud touched the Heir's temple. A pulse of light surged through bone and thought. Images flickered, moments half remembered, half forgotten, until one memory trembled to the surface. The witch inhaled sharply, sensing it. Childhood warmth, a fire's glow. The herbalist humming softly. Safety. Love. The memory quivered like a leaf about to fall. The Heir reached for it instinctively, trying to hold what was theirs. But the witch's grip tightened. Golden strands of memory unraveled into the air, drifting toward her palm in shimmering threads. The warmth faded from the Heir's chest, replaced by a hollow ache. A piece of their life, stolen, swallowed. The witch closed her fist, absorbing the memory. "It is done," she rasped. "The forest recognizes your sacrifice." She pointed her staff toward a narrow, unseen trail winding into shadow. "Walk carefully, Heir of the map." Her voice cracked like a breaking branch. "The Veilwood opens for you, and only you." The forest's grip tightened around the Heir as the path descended into a hollow drowned in shadow. The air smelled of rust and old rain. Something vast slumbered beneath twisted pines, too large to be beast, too shaped to be stone. The fog shifted, revealing the outline of a colossal figure half buried in earth and root. What emerged from the gloom was a giant of iron plates, rust-eaten and moss-soaked. Roots threaded through its joints like veins reclaiming flesh. Its face, curved in forgotten style, bore the grief of ages. It had not fallen naturally. It had been bound, held in place by a judgment older than any living memory. A tremor rolled through the ground. The giant stirred, iron eyelids etched with runes cracking open. A groan thundered through the hollow, shaking dust from branches. One root-bound arm twitched, snapping tendrils like brittle cords. The Heir stumbled back as the ancient sentinel pulled itself a fraction upward. It was not dead. It was rising. Its voice rumbled like stone breaking. "Child of the map-bearer," it intoned. "Hear truth buried in betrayal." The forest seemed to lean in as its words shook the air. 3 hands broke the pact. Its head lifted with pained effort. Greed from the east, fear from the west, betrayal from the south. Each word struck with the weight of judgment. The runes dimmed as roots tightened, dragging the giant downward once more. Its eyes locked onto the air, ancient, mournful, resolute. "Go deeper," it whispered. "The heart stirs. He seeks reckoning." The giant reached toward the Heir, fingers snapping roots before being pulled under. "A verdict waits in the dark," it rasped, "and it is meant for you alone." The path narrowed into a tunnel of briars, twisted into unnatural shapes. Their thorns caught what little light filtered through the canopy, gleaming like sharpened bone. A low hum vibrated through the air, steady, mournful, too coordinated to be mere wind. The air slowed, instinct warning that this was no ordinary thicket. The voices began softly, woven from the trembling of thorns. No mouths shaped the sound. No bodies stood behind the song. It rose from the briars themselves, a layered chorus thick with sorrow and accusation. Each note scraped across bone, carrying centuries of regret. The air felt the forest's grief coil around them. The hum deepened into a vision. Behind the Heir's eyes, memories not their own ignited. Villagers kneeling before ancient stones, flames devouring sacred groves, elders whispering prayers they never honored. These were not legends. They were confessions carved into bark and root. Betrayal replaying itself in the forest's living memory. The Briar Choir's song sharpened into something close to anger. Thorns curled inward, brushing the Heir's sleeves and drawing lines of blood that gleamed black in the dimness. The music accused, revealing truths the valley had buried under fear and lies. The forest was not showing them history. It was demanding acknowledgement. The final tone struck like a wound opening. Then the briars parted, their branches relaxing as though satisfied. The Heir staggered forward, breath heavy with the weight of the vision. The Veilwood had revealed who broke the pact, and why. And it would not allow the Heir to forget what it had shown. The forest grew strangely quiet after the choir's judgment, as though watching the Heir absorb the truth. Ash crackled underfoot, cool, powder soft, though no fire had touched the Veilwood in decades. Then a flicker darted across the path. A small shape paused on a fallen log, ember-bright eyes glowing. The creature resembled a hare, but its fur was soot and smoke, drifting in faint wisps. Its ears twitched toward sounds the Heir could not hear. Then it spoke, not with a mouth, but in a chittering rhythm that shaped meaning in the Heir's mind. Late to learn, it teased, early to bleed. Mischief and warning tangled in its voice. The Heir stepped cautiously, but the hare mirrored their movement, mocking in playful defiance. Paths shift, it chirped. Roots lie. Doors open only once. Its riddles rolled like children's rhymes, warped by age. Yet beneath the nonsense pulsed meaning, urgent and true. The Heir felt the forest's message buried inside the trickster's words. Suddenly the hare blocked the path, bristling with sparks. Its soot fur puffed like soldering tinder. Step wrong, it warned, and the forest eats the part that errs. The air tightened around them, listening. The air froze as the creature's ember gaze bore into them. This was no game. This was instruction, disguised as folly. With a flick of its ember tail, the hare darted into an impossibly narrow opening between roots. It glanced back once, expectant. "Follow the forgotten," it whispered, fading like smoke. The roots widened around its passage, the forest granting permission. The Heir stepped toward the shrinking gap, guided once more by the Veilwood's will. The forest released the Heir reluctantly, branches peeling back like ribs forced open. As they stepped into the valley's pale daylight, the air felt thin, fragile compared to the Veilwood's breath. Villagers peeked from shutter cracks, fear widening their eyes. They pretended ignorance, but terror trembled beneath every doorstep. The Heir sought answers first in the eastern village. Its elder, draped in wolf pelt and pride, poured tea with shaking hands. "The forest turned cruel," he insisted. "We were its victims." His words were too practiced, too polished to believe. Behind him hung trinkets carved from forbidden wood. His truth was a shield, not a confession. In the western village, the elder, a stern woman with iron-grey braids, met the Heir with accusations. "The others broke faith," she declared. "We kept the pact." Yet her home was lined with charms woven from Veilwood bark, symbols unmistakably tied to forbidden rituals. Her certainty cracked with every breath. Her truth was shaped by fear. The southern elder spoke in trembling tones. "We sealed our borders to survive," he murmured. "We harmed nothing." But his ledger told another story. Entries of withheld offerings, broken rights, abandoned obligations. His voice shook as he denied what his own ink confessed. His truth was crafted by desperation. By nightfall, the Heir carried 3 versions of the past, each twisted, incomplete, and riddled with lies. None claimed responsibility. Each blamed another. And beneath every denial, the forest's whisper pressed harder, urging return. The valley's sins ran deeper than any elder dared admit. The Veilwood demanded witness, not excuses. The Heir turned toward the forest once more. The trees parted before them like a mouth opening in the dark. Whatever waited inside would not accept half-truths. The time for lies had ended. The forest was ready for judgment, and ready for its heir. The Heir stepped back into the Veilwood, and the forest closed behind them with quiet finality. The tree line sealed like a wound, shutting out the valley's pale light. Inside, the air thickened, not with fog, but with intention. Every tree leaned subtly inward, as if recognizing the Heir's return and adjusting its posture to witness what must follow. The ground beneath their feet shifted with slow deliberation. Roots swelled upward like serpents testing the air, then withdrew to reshape the very soil. A path emerged, only to collapse moments later into tangled undergrowth. The forest did not offer roots, it offered choices, each one fraught, each one watching the Heir's every hesitation. The Heir walked carefully, knowing the Veilwood now moved in real time around them. Branches knotted above their head, weaving patterns that felt half like warning, half like guidance. Shadows flowed across the ground with purpose, not matching the direction of the dim sun overhead. Even the moss seemed to whisper, curling away from steps that faltered and leaning toward steps taken with resolve. A sudden tremor rippled through the forest floor, subtle but unmistakable. The air stumbled as the earth beneath their boots sagged and then rose, almost like a living creature turning over in restless sleep. From somewhere deep within the forest, a low vibration traveled through the roots. A heartbeat felt more than heard, ancient and immense. The trees parted one final time, opening onto a narrow passage lit by faint green phosphorescence. The air tasted metallic, electric, charged with expectation. The air sensed the Veilwood testing them, shaping the path in response to every doubt, every breath. Forward was the only direction the forest allowed, and so the air stepped deeper into a place where the ground itself watched. The deeper the air walked, the thinner the light became, as though the forest siphoned it from the air. Shapes emerged along the path, small wooden figures propped between roots, carved crudely from fallen branches. Their bodies were twisted, their limbs jointed at unnatural angles, and their faces bore shallow hollows where eyes should have been. They watched with silence sharper than any blade. The air knelt beside one, feeling the wood's surface. It was cold, too cold for the warm forest floor. A faint pulse shivered through it, like breath trapped inside timber. When the air's fingers brushed the hollowed eyes, a whisper spilled out, soft and childlike, echoing with voices that did not come from the figure's small wooden shape, but from somewhere older, deeper, buried. A chorus of tiny creaks stirred behind the Heir. More wooden effigies had appeared along the path, though none had been there moments before. Their heads tilted in unison, necks bending with unnatural precision. One stepped forward, its movement twitchy, joints snapping like dry twigs. Its hollow face, angled upward, empty eyes glowing faintly with reflected green light. A voice, not spoken, but pressed into the Heir's mind, filled the space between trees. It carried sorrow and warning woven into one. "They forgot us," the child voices whispered. "Left us, offered us, lost us." The wooden forms trembled as if reliving memories older than their carved bodies. Each figure held the weight of a life stolen or sacrificed for the pact the valley betrayed. The effigies parted slowly, granting passage. As the Heir walked through, the wooden children bowed their heads, not in reverence, but mourning. Their voices faded into the rustling leaves. "Witness," they whispered, "so we are not forgotten." And the Heir stepped onward, carrying the grief of those the forest had reshaped into remembrance. The trees thinned into a clearing bathed in muted emerald light, as though the air itself was stained by moss. At its center stood a stag, massive, unmoving, its body draped in hanging moss like funereal cloth. Its antlers reached upward, like ancient, gnarled roots clawing towards the sky. Though still as stone, the air felt its attention like a hand pressed firmly to the chest. A gustless breeze rippled the moss along its hide. Beneath the green veils, glimpses of bone gleamed, pale and wet as though freshly exposed. The stag did not breathe, yet the clearing pulsed with a rhythm in time with some hidden heartbeat. When its eyes opened, milky and clouded with age, the air felt their own breath caught, trapped by the weight of recognition. The stag lowered its head, and with the motion came a vision that split the air open. Flames licking sacred groves, shattered stones of ancient oath circles, children crying as offerings were withheld, hands tearing bark from holy trees, waves of betrayal layered upon betrayal, each memory searing like fire fed into bone. The air staggered, clutching at nothing, overwhelmed by what the forest showed. Just as suddenly, the vision dissolved, leaving the air gasping in the thick moss-scented air. The stag lifted its head again, staring with a mournful, almost pleading intensity. It was not a guardian nor creature. It was a vessel, carrying the forest's pain in its hollowed body. The judgment was not its own, but it bore it willingly. The moss-eaten stag stepped aside, its hooves making no sound on the forest floor. Its antlers brushed against a cluster of trees, which parted like grieving mourners, letting the air pass. The way forward was clear, but the air walked with new weight. The forest no longer whispered its sorrow. It showed it. The path curved into a dim hollow, lit by drifting spores that glowed like captive stars. 3 figures sat around a woven reed mat, crones older than memory, their eyes clouded white, their fingers stained by years of weaving. Threads of bark and hair and moss stretched between their hands, forming patterns that shifted like living runes. They did not look up when the air approached. Instead, one extended a thin finger and touched the ground, causing the woven mat to ripple. Images flickered across it, faces the air recognized, faces they did not. Generations of oath-keepers and oath-breakers spiraled across the surface. The mat was not cloth. It was history made tangible. The first wife spoke with a voice like dry leaves. "We wove the Pact." The second with a voice like running water. "We watched it fray." The third with a voice like cracking bone. "We foretold its breaking." Together they breathed in unison, and the entire hollow pulsed with their breath. The air knelt despite themselves, humbled by the ancient cadence. Their hands moved again, weaving a new pattern. This one showed a figure marked by light and shadow, an heir chosen not for purity, but for inheritance of debt. The mat vibrated beneath the heir's palms, humming with truth. The crones turned their blind eyes toward the heir, and the forest held its breath. "We offer prophecy," the wives whispered, "but prophecy is not promise." Their threads grew taut, glowing faintly before snapping in a burst of spores. The woven mat dissolved into dust, scattering like memory released. The wives bowed their heads, the hollow dimmed, and the air felt the forest's will hardening around them, like a noose tightening with purpose. The forest darkened, as though the canopy thickened above the heir's head, blotting out the faint stars. The air grew colder, damp with the scent of old stone and deeper earth. Ahead lay an opening, a jagged wound in the forest floor, framed by twisted roots. It exhaled a chill that felt too ancient to be natural. This was the entrance to the root vault. A narrow bridge of intertwined roots spanned the chasm, slick with moisture and pulsing faintly with inner light. Stepping onto it felt like stepping onto the spine of a buried titan. Each footfall sent tremors through the roots, their vibrations echoing downward into depths unseen. Something below shifted in response, immense and patient. Halfway across, shadows rose from the chasm, thin, elongated figures that flickered between human shape and drifting mist. They moved without sound, gliding around the air like memories trying to remember themselves. Each shadow touched the air lightly, sending a surge of cold through bone. They were not spirits. They were echoes, remnants of those lost to the forest's forgotten bargains. The air forced themselves forward as the shadows gathered thickly, forming a ring around the bridge. From below came a deep resonance, like the slow inhalation of a sleeping god. The bridge vibrated, roots twisting and tightening. The crossing was a test, not of strength but of resolve. The Veilwood watched every heartbeat. At last the air reached the opposite side, where a narrow passage descended into darkness lit only by faint bioluminescence. The forest did not ease its pressure. It only shifted, focusing on the air with sharpened intent. Beyond this threshold lay the heart of its memory, and the one who guarded it. The air changed before the path did. Cold crept in first, threading through the air's bones like water through cracked stone. The usual forest sounds, distant groans of wood, the faint rustle of leaves, fell away one by one, smothered by a silence that felt deliberate. Even the roots beneath the soil seemed to pause, holding still as if listening for permission to move. The tunnel of bioluminescent growths opened into a vast, hidden glade, its boundary marked by a circle of ancient stones half swallowed by moss. The air inside seemed thicker, the light dimmer, as though the forest had drawn its breath inward and refused to let it go. At the center of the glade lay a dark, still pool ringed by blackened roots, twisting like petrified serpents. The Heir stepped forward and felt it, a slow, heavy thud in the ground, as if something beneath the glade had turned in its sleep. The pool's surface shivered without wind, ripples spreading outward, distorting the reflected trees into warped, towering phantoms. The stones around the clearing vibrated softly, shedding dust and lichen in thin veils. This was no mere clearing. This was a throne room, buried and patient. From the pool rose the scent of old mud and iron, thick with the memory of storms long past. The Heir's pulse quickened, matching the slow, monstrous rhythm pulsing beneath the earth. Roots around the water flexed, tightening and loosening, as if they were the tendons of a hand clenching and unclenching. The forest was no longer guiding, nor warning. It was assembling itself, preparing for an arrival. A final tremor rolled through the glade, strong enough to rattle the stones. The pool's surface bulged upward, then fell still, but the Heir could feel it clearly now. Something Vought had opened its eyes somewhere beneath root and water. The Myre Regent, once content to sleep in the valley's forgotten guilt, was stirring, and it had felt the Heir step into its reach. The surface of the black pool tightened, forming a skin of trembling darkness that reflected nothing. The Heir felt pressure build in the air, a tension that pushed against their ribs like a rising tide. Slowly, impossibly, the water began to peel upward, shaping itself into a towering column of liquid shadow. Roots twitched restlessly beneath it, as though bracing for impact. From the center of that rising form emerged a shape too enormous to be human, yet too deliberate to be beast. The water slid back, revealing the faint outline of a face, half-formed, pulsing as if grown rather than sculpted. Its features shifted from one expression to another: sorrow, fury, fatigue, hunger. A being built from the valley's sins, given form by centuries of silence. Eyes opened in the mass, pale and lidless, glowing like fungus beneath rotting bark. They focused on the Heir with slow, predatory certainty. The Regent did not blink. It simply watched, head tilting with the heavy curiosity of something deciding whether to crush or spare. Its breath was the movement of the pool itself, deep, slow, ancient. A low sound vibrated across the glade, too deep to be voice, yet shaped like language. The Heir felt the meaning rather than heard it. Not welcome, not threat, recognition. The Regent remembered the map-maker, the herbalist whose hands had once traced the Pact's boundaries, and it recognized the blood standing before it. One who had inherited a burden they did not choose. The towering face lowered, water and root musculature creaking with strain. Its cold gaze pinned the Heir, pressing them to the edge of breathlessness. The Regent wanted something, needed something, and the forest's long-withheld judgment waited in the pause between heartbeats. Whatever came next would carve the Heir's path deeper into the Veilwood's oldest truths. The Regent's massive head loomed over the Heir, the entire glade humming with its weight. A ribbon of water unspooled from its form, twisting through the air like a serpent of liquid memory. It touched the Heir's chest lightly, and the world around them dissolved into swirling darkness, streaked with pale green light. The forest was not speaking. It was showing. They stood in the Veilwood as it once was, bright, alive, woven with paths that glowed under moonlight. The three villages approached the forest's heart with reverence, bearing gifts of grain, metal, honey, and song. At the center stood the Regent, smaller then, shaped more gently by the world's balance. It was not a creature of punishment, but a steward of harmony. The vision shifted. The elders of each village placed hands upon a great stone, speaking vows older than language. To honor the forest's rhythms, to offer what they took, to keep the pact whole. Runes flared, roots curled around their wrists, binding promise to bloodline. The Regent lowered its head in acceptance. The pact was born from trust, not fear. Then came the unraveling, slow at first, then swift as plague. One village withheld offerings during famine. Another cut sacred groves for war. A third sought to trap a spirit for power. Each breach tore at the pact, twisting the Regent's form until it warped into the towering horror that now filled the glade. Betrayal reshaped it as surely as storms shape rock. The vision snapped back to the present. The Regent lowered itself, eyes dim with centuries of burden. The air gasped as the sensation of the forest's betrayal settled like a stone in their lungs. The Regent's face hovered inches away, waiting for the air to understand. The forest had suffered, and the air's bloodline had watched it all unfold. When the vision faded, the Regent drew back, towering higher than before. Its voice rolled through the glade, wordless yet unmistakably commanding. The air felt the meaning press into their mind. The pact cannot heal by silence. A debt must be named. A judgment must be witnessed. The forest demanded truth spoken aloud, not whispered, not assumed, but confronted. The water-root body twisted, revealing shapes trapped in its depths, silhouettes of elders past, their faces twisted with guilt and stubborn pride. They were not dead. They were remembered, held, preserved in the Regent's body like stains in glass. Each one had lied, concealed, or broken faith, and the Regent showed them to the air as warnings of what the forest would never forget. A tendril of water extended toward the air, hovering before their heart. It pulsed once, heavy with expectation. The air felt the weight of generations pressing inward. The Regent wanted a confession, not of personal sin, but of the valley's truth. The air's voice trembled as they spoke the words the forest demanded, that the elders had lied, the pact had broken, and the forest had borne the pain alone. At the confession's edge, the trees around the glade shuddered. Branches trembled like limbs caught between rage and relief. The Regent's massive form lowered once more, its features softening in ways impossible for something made of water and root. The forest did not seek vengeance. It sought acknowledgement. Someone to name what had been buried. The Regent withdrew the tendril and sank deeper into the pool, though its presence only grew stronger. Judgment was no longer withheld. It was moving, building, gathering like thunder in the soil. And the air felt the truth pierce them with sudden clarity. They would not leave the Veilwood until the forest decided how the debt must be repaid. The pool darkened, swirling with slow, deliberate spirals as the Regent sank beneath its surface. The entire glade held its breath. Stones creaked, trees bowed inward, roots tightened beneath the soil like muscles preparing for decisive movement. The air felt the forest's tension coil around them, a verdict drawing its first inhale. The water rose again, but not as a figure. Instead, it shaped itself into a vast circle, hovering above the pool like a suspended moon of black liquid. Within it, images flickered, past wrongs, broken oaths, faces of elders long dead. The Regent lifted the circle higher, letting its edges drip with luminous threads that burned like molten sap. Then the images changed. The Heir saw themselves, standing at the forest's edge, entering the marsh, crossing the bridge of roots, walking among effigies, facing shadows older than memory. Every step, every fear, every sacrifice was displayed in stark detail. The Regent showed not judgment of the Heir's lineage, but of the Heir's own choices within the forest. The circle dissolved, collapsing into a rain of glowing droplets that hissed as they struck the soil. The glade dimmed. The Regent surged upward once more, towering higher than before, and its voice, no longer wordless, filled the Heir's mind with a single, undeniable truth. You will carry the debt. You will reclaim what was broken. You will speak the forest's will. Roots snapped upward from the ground, coiling around the edges of the pool. The Regent lifted one massive arm of water and root, extending it toward the Heir like an oath made physical. It offered not punishment, nor death, but a role, one only blood of the map-maker could fulfill. The Heir reached forward, trembling, as the Regent awaited their acceptance. When their hand touched its liquid form, the forest roared. Trees bent, ground trembled, and the Veilwood's ancient heart awoke fully. The Regent's verdict was sealed. The Heir was no longer merely witness. They were bound. When the roar of the Veilwood finally faded, a different sound took its place. A low, continuous creaking, like the world itself shifting its weight. The Heir stood trembling at the edge of the black pool, hand still tingling where it had touched the Regent. The air felt heavier now, laden not only with memory, but with obligation. The forest had decided, and its decision included them. Across the valley, roots began to move. Beneath cottages, between stones, under fields where generations had planted and harvested, pale tendrils slid quietly through the soil. They did not tear or shatter. They curled and coiled, feeling the weight of what rested above them: walls, beds, cradles, altars. The Veilwood was not lashing out. It was taking inventory. In the villages, lanterns flickered as floors shifted imperceptibly. Elders clutched their chests, sensing something they could not name. Children woke from dreams of trees leaning through their windows, branches tapping like knuckles demanding entry. Wells darkened as faint threads of root brushed their stone linings. The forest was no longer confined to its edge. It was reminding the valley whose land it had always been. Back in the glade, the air felt those movements as a faint ache beneath their feet, as if each root was a thought passing through their body. The bond with the Regent was not ceremonial. It was living, immediate. With every breath, the air sensed which grove trembled, which stone circle stirred, which village tried desperately to pretend nothing had changed. They were no longer separate from the forest's will. They were its voice. The Regent sank once more beneath the pool, but its presence did not recede. It thrummed beneath the soil, within bark, along every root that now reached for the valley. Above the glade, branches bent in a slow, unified bow, not to the air, but to the verdict now set in motion. Judgment had left the heart of the Veilwood and begun its quiet walk toward every doorstep. The Heir descended from the glade and followed the shifting paths toward the valley, the Veilwood parting with a slow, deliberate grace. Shadows bowed out of their way. Leaves whispered with an eerie reverence. The forest no longer tested their resolve. It carried them forward with the calm certainty of a verdict being delivered. The Regent's will pulsed beneath every step. When they reached the valley's edge, dawn had begun to bleed faint gold across the horizon, but the light looked muted, as if filtered through the forest's judgment. Roots coiled loosely along the soil's surface, like the veins of a sleeping beast. Villagers gathered in clusters, whispering, trembling, sensing the presence that followed the air, yet daring not to name it. The valley felt smaller, watched. The air stood before them in the early light, the map rolled at their side. It no longer felt like parchment. It felt like a living decree. They could sense where offerings must be restored, where oaths needed repairing, where the land had been wounded. The Veilwood had not chosen destruction. It had chosen rebalancing, and that rebalancing demanded the valley's participation, not its excuses. An elder stepped forward from the eastern village, but the ground shuddered softly beneath him, silencing his rehearsed denials. Another elder approached, trembling, clutching a charm of forbidden wood. The charm split down the center as a root slid up from the earth, severing the false blessing. The forest did not need their explanations. It required their surrender to truth. The air lifted the map, and it unfurled on its own, glowing faintly. Trails realigned, boundaries shifted. Sacred sites pulsed with renewed light. The valley's future was redrawn in lines of living ink, reshaping what the villagers believed they owned. The new balance was not negotiation. It was restoration, and the forest would accept nothing less. The air led the villagers to the old stone circle at the forest's edge, where offerings had once been placed with reverence. The stones, cracked and overgrown, leaned inward like weary giants awaiting judgment. A faint green glow pulsed beneath the moss, eager yet restrained, as if the Veilwood held its breath for the valley's next move. At first, the villagers hesitated, clutching baskets of grain, carved tokens and jars of honey. These were remnants of old traditions, revived hastily in fear. But the air sensed what the Regent truly wanted, not convenience, not gestures, but sincerity. Offerings given because the forest was owed, not because people feared punishment. The difference mattered now more than ever. A child stepped forward first. Small hands placed a simple braid of dried flowers upon the stone, flowers gathered with care, not obligation. The stone brightened. The villagers stared as the moss withdrew slightly, revealing ancient carvings beneath. Encouraged, others approached. Some brought herbs. Some tools crafted from wood offered respectfully. Some brought nothing but apologies, spoken with trembling conviction. As each offering touched the stone, the ground hummed with approval. The Veilwood's roots flexed beneath the soil, absorbing the sincerity, the confession, the humility. The forest was not cruel. It simply remembered. And now, for the first time in generations, it recognized an attempt, however imperfect, to mend what had been broken. The air placed the final offering, the herbalist's old charm, repaired and bound with new thread. As it touched the stone, the carvings lit fully, burning with a soft, verdant glow. The forest exhaled, a long, deep sigh that rustled every leaf in the valley. The offering had been accepted. Far within the Veilwood, the black pool stirred once more. The Regent's massive shape rose only halfway from the dark waters, its form thinner, calmer, as though the burden of centuries had eased by a fraction. Its eyes, pale and lidless, glowed with a gentler light. It did not summon the Heir. It watched, assessing whether its will had been honored. The trees around the pool relaxed their rigid posture, branches unfurled, roots loosened their grip on the soil. The Regent's body shifted from the towering column of judgment into a form closer to its ancient shape, a steward, not an executioner. The forest's memory had not been erased, but the wound no longer bled openly. The Heir approached the pool once more, compelled not by command, but by choice. The Regent lowered its head, acknowledging the map-bearer not as supplicant, but as partner. Their bond no longer felt like a chain. It felt like a corridor, living, open, allowing voice to move both ways. The forest would speak, but it would also listen. A wave rippled outward from the Regent, washing gently over the glade. The air warmed slightly, carrying the scent of fresh earth and distant rain. The stones brightened with faint bioluminescence, the first sign in centuries that the Veilwood could heal rather than merely endure. The Regent sank deeper into the water, satisfied. Only its eyes remained above the pool, faint and watchful. The forest had accepted the valley's attempt at amends, but it would never fully release its vigilance. The balance was restored, but fragile. It would rely on the Heir to keep the truth present, the offerings honest, and the memory alive. Dusk settled over the valley as the Heir stepped out of the forest one final time. The villagers gathered silently, sensing the shift before the Heir even spoke. The air felt lighter. The roots beneath their feet no longer stirred. Lamps burned steadier. Children stopped trembling in their sleep. The Veilwood had accepted its offerings and named its Heir. The Heir unrolled the map before them, and the villagers gasped. The parchment shimmered with new lines of pale green light, roots freshly drawn, sacred spaces newly reclaimed. Some paths closed forever. Others reopened after centuries of silence. It was no longer a record of what was. It had become a living guide for what must be. They spoke not with authority, but with the calm certainty of someone who could feel the forest's pulse inside their bones. Offerings must resume, not as fear, but as reciprocity. Groves must be tended, not owned. Rights must be kept, not exploited. The elders listened with lowered heads, recognizing the forest's verdict in the Heir's voice. When night fully fell, the Veilwood glowed faintly at its edge, a soft halo of acceptance. For the first time in generations, the forest did not loom. It watched. It breathed with the valley rather than against it. The Heir felt the Regent settle deeper into the pool, no longer burdened by fresh betrayal, but still anchored in memory. The balance, not peace, not safety, but balance, had been restored. The Heir folded the map and stepped into the night. The forest whispered with recognition, the villagers with gratitude, the stones with quiet relief. The tale of the valley no longer belonged to fear or secrecy. It belonged to truth, living, painful, necessary. And as long as the Heir walked the land, the Veilwood would never again be forgotten.